My name is Will, and this is the 12th video in a series about the DC Comics character Martian Manhunter. This will cover two issues of the comic Secret Origins. One that tells the new origin of the Justice League for the post-Crisis on Infinite Earths world, sometimes referred to as New Earth or Earth Zero. The other issue is the origin of Ja'an himself. I will also cover the first Martian Manhunter comic and the Justice League annual that sets it up. The first Martian Manhunter comic was a 4-issue limited series in 1988 written by J.M. DeMatteis, and it reimagined Ja'an's origin, which is why I'm going to lump it in with the Secret Origin issues. Now, technically the limited series comes out over a year after Ja'an starts showing up in the new Justice League comic, but since it deals with his origin, and I have a lot to say about it, I want to break it out as a separate video and do that video first. Okay, let's get started. The first annual for the new Justice League tells a story about a sentient cell that is able to infect and take control of the entire League, except for Ja'an, because he's a Martian. He is at a loss as what to do, but he then puts on the Helm of Fate, allowing him to gain knowledge from Nabu, the Lord of Order that lives in the helmet. And if this doesn't make sense to you, maybe you should ask for a deep dive on Dr. Fate. Ja'an then goes to confront the sentient cell, and he has to fight the rest of the League. Now, he says that the League isn't fighting to the best of their abilities, but he does quite well against them. He ignores Mr. Miracle's larva bomb, blows away the Blue Beetle ship, and throws Guy Gardner into orbit. That all must have been very satisfying for him, because, as I will talk about in my next video, his relationship with Guy Gardner and Blue Beetle isn't the best. I guess I would call this his second big flex, because he uses multiple powers, including Super Breath, which had been his go-to ability during the Silver Age Justice League. His verbal flex is also cool as he starts listing his powers and stating that his strength is second to none and that he is not just another costumed human. But the sentient cell inhabits a literal pile of people and does the old "you can't hurt me without hurting innocence" thing. So Ja'an uses the Helmet of Fate to get Nabu to possess the sentient cell and essentially turn it into Dr. Fate. But this plan doesn't fully work. Dr. Fate is unable to fully control the cell, but he does come up with a plan to imprison the cell within Ja'an's body, making him a living prison for what is essentially a disease that can think. Now, this issue is the build-up for the first Martian Manhunter limited series, and it has several foreshadowing moments. There is this subtly introduced idea that putting on the Helmet of Fate begins to unlock buried memories. Ja'an talks about the spread of the disease taking out Mars instead of Earth before he corrects himself. When talking about the sentient cell, he states, "I am not what you think I am." Then he hesitates when he's talking about what he is. When Dr. Fate proposes to contain the sentient cell in Ja'an's body, he gets agitated about a plague and says he won't go through it all again. All of this leads into the 4-issue limited series done by J.M. DeMatteis, with art by Mark Badger. Note that this is without Keith Giffen, so it's very stylistically different from the Justice League books. The art of Mark Badger is also much more stylized and abstract, giving this story a different feel. In this series, J.M. DeMatteis takes advantage of the continuity reboot set up by the Crisis on Infinite Earths. He rewrites the Martian Manhunter's origin, indeed he changes the history of the world. Okay, so if you have watched the videos before this one, you will know that I like to compare the influences of Ray Bradbury and Edgar Rice Burroughs on depictions of Ja'an Jones. And actually both authors are mentioned in the limited series, so it is how DeMatteis thinks about the character as well. And DeMatteis was a fan of Bradbury and not so much the pulp of Burroughs. So he crafts a story where he makes Ja'an much more alien and more like a Bradbury Martian than a Burroughs Martian. The idea of the story is that either wearing the Helmet of Fate or being a container for a sentient cell triggers the return of his real memories of the real Mars, and that all his existing memories of home are fake, and indeed his whole superhero nature is this fake construct that was used to help keep him sane. He basically replaces a fake Burroughs-inspired Mars with the real Bradbury-inspired Mars. Okay, let's go through the story step by step. It starts with him getting sick. He believes that it is caused by the sentient cell his body was used to imprison. And his body starts to warp. He goes to Batman for help, and Batman is glad to see him and help him, reaffirming their Justice League founder friendship. And throughout this story, Batman is driven to help Ja'an, and you can see this as the importance of their friendship to Batman, or just the simple fact that Batman is a super driven guy. So John talks to Batman and confides in him that he had no friends outside of the League, once again reinforcing how important the League is to John and bringing up the theme of loneliness, which is a repeated theme for John, especially after this point. Then Haranmir, the Martian death god, shows up. For a while, it is unclear whether it is the real Haranmir or a creation of John's fevered mind. Other members of the Justice League interact with Haranmir, and they think that maybe they see Haranmir because John's mental abilities are making them see him. The ability to mentally create realistic illusions would be a pretty dramatic increase in John's power at this point. But also in the story, they say that John could black out their minds, which is something he had never done. So there is this assumption of mental powers that John had never displayed, but that had been displayed by Martians in Bradbury's Martian Chronicles. But it turns out that Haranmir is indeed real, and his godhood is confirmed by Mr. Miracle, who is also kind of a god, or at least the non-powered son of a god who performs the occasional miracle. That sounds vaguely familiar. It was probably a Marvel comic. Anyway, Haranmir and Mr. Miracle have a mind meld moment, and Mr. Miracle becomes convinced that Haranmir is a real deity. John himself seems convinced that Haranmir is a hallucination caused by the sickness induced by the sentient cell and struggles against him. As John struggles, he remembers things, and he mentally recounts his origins of being brought to Earth by Erdell's machine, and then Erdell dying, which traps him on Earth. Haranmir brings John to Erdell, who turns out to be alive. Instead of being in an unspecified place, Erdell is given a location, a ghost town in Colorado, and he gets a new name, Saul, instead of Mark. Not sure why. Haranmir endangers Erdell and forces John to go through fire to save him. When John does so, he realizes that fire cannot hurt him, and the mental trauma of forcing himself into the fire helps his true memories begin to return. He takes on a new form, which is much more alien, and it turns out that this is his actual true form, making John less human and more alien. His true memories recount a revised origin. Dr. Erdell did collect him from Mars with a device, though the name Robot Brain is tossed for just a machine or matter transmitter. When John came through, he was carrying his dead daughter, who Erdell buried. Erdell nursed John back to health and formed a telepathic bond with him. John then destroyed the machine that brought him to Earth, and his brain shut down. To heal John, Erdell used his telepathic bond to create a fake existence based on the works of Edgar Rice Burroughs. This fake existence caused him to have his traditional form of a green-skinned man with a beetle brow. It also gave him the name John Jones, and his true name is declared to be something unpronounceable. This name detail doesn't really stick, though, especially since the idea that Martian names can't be pronounced is pretty strongly violated by Haranmir. Part of this new set of memories was the idea that Erdell was dead. This was supposed to help him move past his emotional trauma. Erdell also points out that his motivation to become a hero all came from this fake past. So John has Erdell send him to Mars to confront his real past, and he learns that his people all died of a plague. Now I want to trace this idea, and it starts with this. Not the greatest of all time, but a goat, one of the earliest domesticated herd animals. In the Eastern Hemisphere, they developed animal domestication. This meant that people lived in close proximity to animals who were living in close proximity to each other. When this happens, diseases tend to jump between species. So the people of the Eastern Hemisphere, or what was called the Old World, were rife with disease. When they traveled to the Western Hemisphere, or the New World, they brought a host of diseases which decimated the native populations. This idea was then used in 1898 by the author H.G. Wells in The War of the Worlds. It tells a story where Martians invade Earth and are unstoppable militarily, but they are killed by diseases. Ray Bradbury then uses this idea in the Martian Chronicles, where humans visiting Mars bring diseases which wipe out the Martian people. J.M. DeMatteis then copies Bradbury and Wells and has the Martian people wiped out by plague. But in this case, the origin of the plague isn't really clear. Okay, back to John. On Mars, John encounters Haranmir once again, and Haranmir helps John remember the past. In the past, his wife died from the plague, and her body was burned, which was extremely traumatic for John. And this is given as the cause for his weakness to fire. Fire caused him to have memories of his wife being burned that he couldn't consciously process, so it manifested as a weakness to fire. John encounters the ghosts of the Martian people, including his wife and daughter, and they explain that the ghosts of the Martian people are trapped because John has been unable to let go of Mars because he couldn't remember Mars. His wife encourages him to let go of the ghosts of Mars and embrace life on Earth. John comes to terms with his past, and the ghosts of the Martian people can finally rest. John also learned that Erdell's machine pulled him through time, and that he actually was moved centuries forward in time, making the Martian civilization long dead. John returns to Earth in his true form, and happily embraces his friends. He embraces his true past, but also recognizes that the Earth is his home. And on the final page, DeMatteis dedicates the story to Ray Bradbury as the man who discovered Mars. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here because this makes some pretty big changes. One big change is making John the last Martian. In the Silver and Bronze Age, the Martian race was alive and had developed a history and had interacted with Earth, like when they tried to conquer Earth, causing the League to be dissolved. But DeMatteis uses the Crisis on Infinite Earths as an excuse to change the past and unmake the Martian people. Note that a similar thing was done with Superman. After the Crisis, Superman was rebooted, and they stuck to the idea that he was the only Kryptonian for quite some time, removing classic characters like Supergirl and Zod. So John becomes the last living Martian. So the past with Dennis O'Neill's Burroughs-inspired Martians is rejected, and this rejection actually has two parts. First, the actual continuity part of no other Martians being alive, and the second is the world of false memories. And I think the idea was that DeMatteis wanted to make a clean sweep of who and what John was, so he had almost every belief about who he was turn out to be a lie. But while setting this up, he actually constructs most of this fake past himself. John talks about his father being a warrior and his mother a sorceress. He talks about being a warrior and writing chotas, whatever those are. It is all meant to be pulp inspired, and it is all meant to be fake. And it is almost all new in this comic. These elements aren't things from earlier comics. They are invented in this comic in order to be immediately rejected. So DeMatteis constructs the fake past that he has John reject. The real Mars and his real past are very different. His father is a singer instead of a warrior, and Martians are a race of artists and philosophers who have been at peace for a long time. Who John had been was tied to this fake past, and with this revelation that it was all fake, John becomes someone very different. But John decides to basically stay the same, and to keep his whole fake heroic identity while he tries to figure out who he really is. He does, however, know that he loves Earth and sees it as his home. He does seem to feel a genuine friendship for his old friends as well, and these parts of himself are real. So going forward, John has this dual identity, his normal heroic persona and his real but hidden self. And partly this is so he can keep going as a recognizable hero when literally almost everything about him has changed. Underneath the hero is his real persona that he is trying to figure out. The real identity is only occasionally mentioned, but it does show up again and again and becomes a theme for the character over the years. Now, I think this kind of works because the idea of a dual identity where there is you show the world, and the real you underneath that you haven't fully figured out yet, seems like a common human experience, especially for certain age groups.
Let me out, what you see is not the same person as me, my life's a lie, I'm not who you're looking at, let me out, set me free.
With these changes, one of the things that DeMatteis was trying to do was remove elements from John that he didn't like. One of these was the fire weakness. In this limited series, the fire weakness is revealed to be psychological, and he overcomes it. Haranmir forces him to overcome it by putting Erdell in danger. He does this in order to help break down John's mental barriers. When this happens, John realizes that fire cannot hurt him, and that his aversion to fire was due to memories of his wife. Now, fire was an important weakness when John was fighting normal humans who were in no way a match for him, but by the 80s, this wasn't really an issue. He fought powerful villains like Starro, Despero, the Overmaster, and during this time he wasn't shown as completely invulnerable. He could be hurt by things besides just fire. John has mentioned many times his strength is equal to Superman's, but he doesn't mention his invulnerability, like when he gets dropped by a manhole cover to the face. So, The fire weakness wasn't needed to make him vulnerable, and DeMatteis was trying to get rid of it. He never wrote John as weak to fire after this. But the removal of this weakness did not fully gain traction. Other authors apparently didn't get the memo. Jim Starlin had John weak to fire in Cosmic Odyssey, which came out 4 months after this limited series. Other authors like Mark Waid and Gerard Jones would later show John as vulnerable to fire, and DeMatteis' attempt to remove the fire weakness would ultimately fail to fully gain traction. Another thing that happens in this limited series is that John is identified as a parent. Now, over time, John had basically been aging in terms of how he's depicted. In the Silver Age, he seemed somewhat young. He was an alien lost on Earth, and when he connects to his family on Mars, he connects to his parents and little brother. It was shown that he lived with his parents. This all makes him seem young. In the Bronze Age, the mentions of his parents disappear, and instead he is the leader of his people. He also has a girlfriend, so living with his parents is off the table. These elements make him seem older. Finally, in his new origin, he was revealed as a father. This makes him seem even older. And this fits with the personality changes. He was hot-headed during the Bronze Age, but after that he becomes calm and stoic and fits the role of father better. This dad energy also fits well with his role in Justice League International, where he leads the team and has to suffer through his teammates' various arguments and antics. Past this point, he will often refer to his teammates as children, and a couple times even as my children. This is generally because he sees them as immature, but there's also an element of affection. But John wasn't the only one that had his origin rewritten. After the Crisis on Infinite Earths, DC launched the Secret Origins comic. It was basically to tell the stories of all these DC characters and how they fit into this new combined world. In Secret Origins 32, Keith Giffen and Peter David retell the Justice League origin story told in Justice League of America number 9. This story is interesting in how it has changed from the original origin. The big things are that Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman are all out of the League. Wonder Woman is replaced by Black Canary. This retelling is also 12 pages longer than the original, and it abandons the framing device used in Justice League of America number 9. But it is largely a scene-for-scene retelling. It is also written by Giffen and David, who are on the comedic side of the comic writer spectrum, and there are jokes added, like how they want to call themselves the Avengers, or how Superman ignores them because he is focused on, well, let's be honest, having intimate relationships with Lois Lane. Maybe the comic code guys didn't know what tumble meant. But let's focus on John. In this story, John has not yet revealed himself to the world, and he remarks on his loneliness and his desire for friends. He battles the Stone Apalexian, like in the original, and then flies north and talks to Green Lantern, who is, of course, at ease around aliens, and they bond a bit. They see Superman, who has already beaten one of the Apalexians, and John exclaims, "By Tarkus!" This is a reference to the Edgar Rice Burroughs Green Martian character, Tars Tarkus, who shares some similarities with John and may have helped inspire the Martian Manhunter character, or at least the visuals of the character. But Superman flies off to try and get some action, and Green Lantern, Flash, Black Canary, Aquaman, and John all end up talking. Flash wants to start a team, but John is reluctant because he is hesitant to go public, but his desire for friendship finally convinces him. The original origin doesn't really go into why he joins, but in this version he simply wants friends who know what he is, and this again highlights what the League means to John and how it is slightly different than what the League means to anyone else. It also ties into his sense of loneliness, being the last of his kind, a repeated theme for John. Now, back in the Silver Age, John becoming a public hero happens in Detective Comics 273, where he loses the ability to use his powers while invisible due to being drugged by another Martian. He then has to go public in order to fight this other Martian. Since DeMatteis essentially erased other Martians, changing the reason for him going public to being in the Justice League does make a lot of sense. In fact, this idea of the League helping him go public was also in Steve Englehart's retelling of the Justice League origin in issue 144. Now, Secret Origins 35 would actually cover John himself, which was a little weird because his origin had already been redone in the Martian Manhunter series. But Mark Verheiden and Ken Stacey do a 7-page story with a very prosy style, and it focuses on John's life on Earth when he didn't have a public identity. Basically the period corresponding to Detective Comics 225 to 273. so this part of his origin doesn't overlap much with DeMatteis' limited series. The essential story is framed as John visiting an old cop friend who knew he was a Martian, but whose memories John had erased. The idea is that John decides to restore his memories because John himself realized his own memories had been fake, and he learns the value of having real memories. John also now has a public identity and doesn't need to hide, so he wants to reconnect with an old friend. The cop, who isn't named, then recounts a story where he learns that the detective John Jones is an alien. He also learns about John's past when John implants the knowledge into him. Some details contradict stuff from the past, but the Crisis on Infinite Earths gave writers a license to change things, so this is kind of expected. Okay, one of the first details given is that the detective John Jones died in the line of duty during a police raid in 1968. This kind of lines up with what actually happened in the comics. In 1964, in Detective Comics 326, John's detective identity, John Jones, does seem to die during a police raid. He dies because it appears he is consumed by a cloud monster. This detail isn't mentioned, and the 1968 date is actually the date when Martian Manhunter stopped appearing in the House of Mystery in Justice League. Note that in Justice League 246, John actually tried to get his job back, and his death was forgotten. This mention and this issue of Secret Origins both, however, keep this origin in the past instead of shifting it forward. This does cause a little bit of an Erdell age problem, since Erdell claims it took him 30 years to build the machine that brought John to Earth. And if that happened in 1955, Erdell had to have been at least in his late 80s at best for the story told in 1988. Visually, they stick with DeMatteis' telling, and the appearance of Erdell and the recently teleported John match the limited series. So in DeMatteis' telling, John is inspired by the fake memories in his head to fight for justice. But this retelling presents a lost John who has no problem hiding himself but doesn't know what to do with himself. And here we get a new element added to John's story. John discovers TV and becomes incredibly influenced by cop shows.
I got news for you, Cosette.
I got
I got news for you, Cosette.
I've got news for you, Cosette.
We keep our farm animals in the farm, not...
This now concludes our broadcasting day.
He decides to model himself after police officers on TV. It is even noted that he dresses much better than normal cops because he is modeling himself off of TV. So this story kind of fleshes out his original one-panel decision to become a cop. It also fleshes out the process by which he becomes a cop. In the original story, he just shows up and gets a job. But in this retelling, it goes into him studying police officers and helping them while invisible. It keeps a little Silver Age detail where criminals occasionally see him but are dismissed as crazy. So after watching TV and then studying the police invisibly, John becomes a cop by mentally constructing a past in the minds of his coworkers. This kind of introduces the idea that John fits into human life by altering the memories of other people, which is kind of a dark element to add to the character. Alongside these retellings of his origin, John also appeared in the newly launched Justice League comic by Giffen and DeMatteis, where he becomes the leader of the Justice League and takes on a new role to fit within the humorous Justice League International. But that is what the next video is going to be about. Like, subscribe, and comment if you would like to encourage me to make more videos.